Greetings fellow hunters, and welcome back to my channel as we perform another deep dive into speculations revolving around Monster Hunter World's Iceborne expansion. Today's topic is a topic that many other Monster Hunter creators have done already. It's going to be a top 5 list regarding returning monsters, but I'm going to be doing my own unique twist to this topic. Rather than just do a video on the monsters that I personally want, I figured I would do a video on what returning monsters are most likely considering what information we know and just other factors. So let us lay down some ground rules first so we are all on the same page for this list. First, I'm not including Nargacuga since he has already been teased in the reveal trailer that just wouldn't be any fun to have him in because he'd come in at number 1 easily. Secondly, I am eliminating any Elder Dragons from this list. Mostly because I want to focus on the monsters that would have more turf wars with other monsters, because we want to be able to see how they interact with one another. And Elder Dragons only tend to have turf wars with their fellow elders, with the exception of Valhazak having a turf war with Odogron. So yeah, I want to focus on them. But if you guys are interested in an Elder Dragon video, we could do that at a later date. And next, in order to make Capcom's job as easy as possible, but also to ensure that we get as many monsters as possible, both new and old, I want these monsters that I'm choosing on this list to either A, already have a skeleton in the game, or, you know, they can just modify the skeleton, or B, be a new skeleton, but be a skeleton that has multiple monsters sharing the same skeleton. Preferably option B, because we want more variety to the monsters we've been fighting in Monster Hunter World. So we don't want to just have same old skeletons that we've had in the game. But, you know, give us a little bit more variety in the fights. But at the same time, if a new skeleton that we're getting in the game has multiple different types of monsters that use that skeleton, then that just means that they can put those monsters into the game and be a lot quicker about it. And yeah, it just really saves them work and makes it so they can get as many monsters into the game as possible. The fourth criteria I want is that the monsters make sense when thinking about the themes of the expansion of what we know about the expansion so far. And lastly, I want to touch on the monster's popularity, because popularity is a factor that Capcom has to consider. Now, with all those rules in mind, I want to give a couple of mentions before we actually start into the actual list. I have a dishonorable mention and an honorable mention. The dishonorable mention's easy, that's just Plesioth. Now, nobody wants Plesioth in World. Plesioth is probably one of the most hated monsters in the Monster Hunter series, for good reason. But Capcom keep on insisting on bringing him back, so they like to ignore popularity, and considering the fact that Iceborne is going to be taking place on an island, there's a very good chance we're going to get some sort of coastal zone, which means unfortunately there's a very good chance we're going to get Plesioth in World. Now, I hope we don't get him, but, you know, it's very likely. That's why he's a dishonorable mention. For the honorable mention, though, I want to see, I personally would want this monster. If it was my own personal list, he would be in the top 5. And I tried everything I could using these criteria to make it so that he could fit into this list, but he doesn't really make sense. And the monster I'm talking about is Barryoz. And now I can hear all the gas from the people listening. I'm included in that. I'm gassing at myself for even saying this. But if you let me explain, you'll understand my reasons for making it so Barryoz doesn't make it on this list. Going by the rules I said above, Brachy fails in both my third rule, which is the sharing of skeletons, as he has a skeleton unique to himself, and rule 4, matching the theme of Iceborne. Going back to the skeleton issue, we all know that Barryoz' skeleton is entirely unique of himself. No other monster has his skeleton. And honestly, that is what makes him so unique. Just think about it. The reason why Barryoz' moveset, even though he's a brute wyverns, which they are known to more use like headbutts and tail slices and bite attacks and stuff like this, the reason why they are they always kind of have like a T-Rex like shape, like think Anjanath, Deviljho. And the more unique ones, you got some ones like Uragon that are capable of rolling up into like a I wouldn't say a ball because they're not spherical, but you know, like they can roll themselves into a circle and roll. But their general shape when they're on their two legs is the same. You got a big body, small arms, two thick hind legs, and a tail. And even if there are variations, they all share that kind of same thing. Barryoz is unique in that regard for brute wyverns because he has his arms, which are much longer. Because of this, and he stands farther upright too. And because of those 2 points, Barryoz actually can punch, which is part of his moveset. And Barryoz' punching, and then the fact that he leaves explosions after he punches, this is probably what creates his fight to be so unique. But all this is enabled due to his skeleton. If we got any other monster that used Barryoz' skeleton, it would just be a cheap copy of the fight that would use the punching mechanics of Barryoz, but it wouldn't have the explosions, because if they did that, that would just be an even cheaper copy. And everyone's like, if you're doing all this, why aren't you just putting Barryoz in the game, right? So, you know, we don't really want them to share his skeleton, and no other monster does currently share his skeleton. And so there's that. There's nothing that shares Barryoz' skeleton, so, you know, we can kind of eliminate him and give him a strike there. But also, if you think of the theme of the expansion, what we know so far, this expansion is called Iceborne. Now, it could be quite possible that we get a volcanic zone. I had a whole discussion with this with a Nestrior over in my video, What Locales Will We Explore? And we started getting on the topic of a volcanic zone, or maybe a volcanic zone that's, you know, like half fire, half ice, you know. And in such a zone, yes, Barryoz could be put in, and it would make sense. And yes, they do add monsters to old zones, so they could add Barryoz to the Elder's Recess. But what we know so far of the expansion is that it's going to be a focus in Ice Base, and to further this point, just stop and think about what we currently have in World. Most of the monsters that we have in World, the highest amount of them do either fire or blast damage, which, thematically speaking, are the exact same. If you think of like Blast Blight and Fire Blight, Fire Blight is more of a dot, a damage over time. Blast Blight is more of a delayed damage proc. If you don't get rid of Blast Blight, you'll just explode and all that. But you get rid of them the same way, by rolling on the ground. Explosions can create fire, so the blast and fire go hand in hand. And so, thematically speaking, a blast monster and a fire monster are pretty much the same thing. So you get a whole bunch of monsters that are either blast or fire based, but in comparison, you have only 2 thunder based monsters in Tobikadachi and Kirin. You could say Great Gyros because of paralysis and all that, and paralysis is fairly similar to lightning, but he doesn't really use, you know, lightning. He doesn't use thunder, so I don't really count Great Gyros in that. So Thunder element has Tobikadachi and Kirin. Water has Gyrototis, and Ice has Legiana. Those elements there don't have much of anything at all. Dragon has a little bit more. You have Zeno, and you have Deviljho, who use attacks that can actually give you Dragon Blight. But then if you also look at the weapon stats, you also have Nergigante and Valhazak, who count as people who give dragon elemental weapons. And so you can say that you have 4 monsters in the game that have dragon element. So thunder, water, and ice are most likely going to be the monsters that we're going to want to expand on, because they're what we don't really have in World. And so Barryoz, a blast-based monster, which we have, thematically speaking, a lot of them currently in the game. there's an oversaturation of them. You know, I'll just play blunt. If I could replace any monster that's currently in Monster Hunter World for Barryoz, just to make it so that there wouldn't be too much of an oversaturation, I'd get rid of Leviathan. We all would, but unfortunately it just doesn't make sense. And like I said, it doesn't really match the theme of the expansion. The only time Blast and Ice go hand in hand is if you're a dual blade. Every other thing, it doesn't make sense. Now that that's out of the way, and you understand my reasonings for not putting Barryoz on this list, like I said, I personally, if I was making a personal top 5, he would be the number 2 or the number 1 slot. But unfortunately, with the way I'm doing this list, it just does not make sense. So let's get on to the actual list. Coming in at number 5 is everyone's favorite Super Saiyan. What are you doing here? No, not you, Goku. No, it's not you either, Vegeta. Get out of here, both of you. Jeez, those two, they always think everything is about them. No, of course I'm talking about Raj Aang, the glorious rampaging monkey. What reason do I have for placing Raj Aang on this list, other than his popularity? Because let's face it, he's an incredibly popular monster, and all that. Well, looking at my criteria, he happens to share a skeleton with another monster for sure, that being Blaganga. And the only notable difference between the two is that Raj Aang has thicker muscles and having horns, but the horns don't really affect the skeleton that much. It's more of just a design choice. Also, when you go and thematically look at them, both Blaganga and Raj Aang have been known to live in ice environments. Blaganga primarily lives in ice environments, but Raj Aang has been known to go into there as well. Specifically speaking, Raj Aang goes wherever Kirin can go. And since we already have Kirin in Monster Hunter World, and there's a good chance, according to the leak list, we're going to get a Orochi Kirin, which is a subspecies of Kirin, I just have a feeling that with 2 different types of Kirin, it's a good time to implement Raj Aang. Now, most likely, if they do, he's going to appear in the Coral Highlands with regular Kirin. But the fact is that Raj Aang would make sense, and it would be the first official Fang Beast, because I know some people are going to be like, but Behemoth is in the game, and Behemoth would technically be a Fang Beast. No. You guys got to remember that, 1, Behemoth is a crossover event, but 2, canonically, the whole Behemoth thing, as well as the whole Witcher 3 collaboration, and all those different collaborations, canonically do not happen. So, the Lunastra, the Devil Joe, and the Call of Taroth events during that we get from Monster Hunter World, they happen, but all the other things, especially Behemoth, don't really happen. All those hunters who said that they went and hunted Behemoth and are wearing Draken-plated armor right now, including myself, yeah, we're all gotten to, I've all been having a big old fever dream, eating the Meowscler chef's magic mushrooms he's been feeding us in his food. Probably at the request of the handler, because, you know, when in doubt, take a bite and all that. So, enough jokes aside, you know, Raj Aang would be the first Fang Beast, which would instantly add a lot of variety. And him and Blaganga have been known to live in ice environments. And when you consider all this and his popularity, Raj Aang coming to World is actually very likely. So, it's just, honestly, if we don't get Raj Aang at Iceborne's launch, there's a very good chance we're going to get him in a future deal, like a future update. And all that within the coming months after it's released. Because, yeah, he's just that popular, and it makes that much sense. So even if the skeleton isn't ready for its launch, I can see them getting it ready after the fact. Coming in at number 4 is Zanna Ogre, the father of the Fanged Wyvern classification. Zanna Ogre's skeleton is very similar to Behemoth's. A lot of people think that they copy it quite clearly, but there is some slight differences. Behemoth took Zanna Ogre's base skeleton, and then they enlarged it and made certain parts of it extra large and all this kind of stuff. So Behemoth, as moveset, ignoring its mechanics like Meteor, Charybdis, Thunder, and all that. If you ignore those mechanics, a lot of Behemoth's moveset that does physical attacks, the more heavy-handed and brutal attacks can actually be seen to be inherited from Zinogre's moveset. But also, another topic of Zinogre's moveset being in World is that some of Zinogre's more agile moves were inherited by other fanged wyverns that were introduced in Monster Hunter World, namely Tobi-Kadachi, who is not just a fanged wyvern, but also a thunder elemental fanged wyvern like Zinogre. So Tobi-Kadachi inherited a lot of Zinogre's more agile base moves. That being said, some of that could also be said to be inherited by Odogaron, because Odogaron and Tobi do share the same skeleton. But, you know, there's that. So my point was saying, naming both Tobi and Behemoth, that they could downsize Behemoth's skeleton, and they could just basically make the certain parts that are extra thick back to their normal Zinogre state, and then they could give it the heavy moves that Behemoth has, and then give it the animations of the more agile moves that Tobi has, and they can basically they'd have to do some slight tweaking to both the moves and the skeleton, but it should be quite easily, like, they can probably quite easily fit Zinogre into the game when you consider all this. Now, that's all for how they could get the skeleton into the game, but I also want to bring up another point. If we're going to get real technical here, right? Barryoz, no other monster truly possesses a Zinogre skeleton. Like I said, Behemoth, although it looks similar to Zinogre skeleton, there is some very big differences between the two, if you know where to look. So technically, Behemoth and Zinogre have two separate skeletons that are just very similar. So technically, like Barryoz, no other monster possesses a Zinogre skeleton. And so, going back to my rules above, you would think, oh, then they can't copy it. But here's the thing. There's a fundamental difference between Barryoz and Zinogre. And that's Zinogre was the father of an entire new classification. He is the original Fanged Wyvern. Great Jagras, Tobi-Kadachi, Great Gyros, Odogaron, all these monsters that we have in World are based and created because Zinogre came before them. Being a original Fanged Wyvern, every fan in the series probably at some point has expected that they're going to take Zinogre's skeleton and they're going to copy it to create another monster. Because it just makes sense. He is the original Fanged Wyvern. People are kind of expecting that this to happen because, you know, they created an entire new classification. The easiest way to create more monsters of that classification is to share the same general skeleton. Barryoz just doesn't have that. This is why Zinogre is much more likely, with the skeleton-wise, to do this. And also, thematically speaking, with what we know of Monster Hunter World Iceborne, Zinogre makes a little bit more sense than Barryoz. Like I said when I touched on Barryoz, they're going to expand on elements that they don't have. So he's a thunder element. They only have 2 of those in the game currently. And so that's a good thing going for him. But also, Zinogre has been known to live in the same environments as Nargacuga. Just to give an example that's a named example, and I'll let you'd see early game in another game. In Monster Hunter Generations, which takes maps from all the other previous games, if you go to the Misty Peaks, you can fight Zinogre and Nargacuga in Misty Peaks. And so the fact that Nargacuga and Zinogre have been known to fight and live in the same environment means that since we know Nargacuga is coming to the game, if they're creating an entirely new zone for Narga, which is likely, check out my Locales We Can Explore video, Zinogre could easily be put in that same zone. So thematically speaking, he also makes more sense as well. So this is why Zanna Ogre is much more likely, and the reason why he's on the list and Barryoz isn't. It's also the reason why he beats out Raj Aang. We are halfway into this list, but I can sure as tell you I am not slowing down any. Sliding into the number 3 slot is Tigrex. Yes, I know. There's gonna be people in the comments that says, but Yuma, Leviathan Wyverns were gonna be, and Tigrex specifically, were going to be in World at launch, but Capcom couldn't get it to work. I'm gonna stop you there. One thing you guys gotta remember is that it's been a year of non-stop development since the Monster Hunter World launch. Do you honestly think in that time they have not been trying to fix the Leviathan skeleton? Yes, they couldn't get it to work for Monster Hunter World's launch, but there's a very good chance they can get it to work in Iceborne. Secondly, a lot of monsters share the Leviathan skeleton alongside Tigrex. Just to give some examples, you have Agnaktor, Mizitsune, and I know it's a Leviathan. I'm not 100% sure if it uses the same skeleton, but you have Royal Ludroth, for example, which could easily be like the low tier monster of a new zone, right? And if they could have gotten the Leviathan skeleton to work, for example, Agnaktor was also going to be in World, but when they couldn't get the Leviathan skeleton to work, they replaced him with Leviathan. So yeah, the fact is that skeleton-wise, there's a lot of stuff. But I also want to bring attention to the thematic reasons. I touched on this before when I mentioned the dishonorable Plesioth, but Monster Hunter World Iceborne is for sure taking place in an island, which means a new coastal zone is very likely. Tigrex is a water-based monster and is known to live on coastal areas. So Tigrex makes a lot of sense, thematically speaking. But then, let's add in the fact that if you take a look at the entire new logo for Monster Hunter World Iceborne, the monster that's designed in this logo that you see is quite obviously a Leviathan monster. Which tells us that the new flagship monster of this expansion, which doesn't necessarily have to be an Elder Dragon. Nargacuga was a flagship, and he's a regular monster. But this new flagship monster is most likely a Leviathan. It just, all the details are there, and if this new monster is a Leviathan, then there's a very good chance that the other Leviathans can come into the game, with Tigrex taking the lead just because they tried to put Tigrex in the game before. Even if there's no new coastal zone, they were planning to put Tigrex in the ancient forest, so they could fit the Tigrex in that area, and it would make sense. We are nearing the end, only 2 more to go, and at this point, considering my list, I think we all know who they are. The runner-up for the most likely returning monster is Barryoz. No surprises here. Barryoz shares the same skeleton as Nargacuga, who we know is coming in Iceborne, so the hard work is done. Also, Barryoz lives in cold environments, so he fits right in with the icy theme of the expansion. When I don't have to say much to justify the reason why he's this high on the list, I just have to say those 2 sentences, and people can go like, yeah, you know what, he's right, it's pretty much guaranteed, isn't it? You know he's a strong contender. Then who could beat out such a strong contender for the number 1 slot? So let's move on to there. Rounding out our list and coming at the number 1 slot is the Roaring Wyvern, Tigrex. And honestly speaking, it was a toss-up between him and Barryoz of who would win and who would take the runner-up slot. After all, both of them share Nargacuga's Sueda wyvern skeleton, and both of them have been known to live in cold environments. I say known because Tigrex has also been able to live in more extreme environments in the other end of the spectrum, such as deserts and volcanoes. Basically, if there's an extreme temperature, whether it's extremely cold or extremely hot, Tigrex can live there. Which is an extra point in Tigrex's favor, because even if you ignore any potential new zones they might add into the game, and you look at the zones that we currently have, he could also be put into both the Wildspire Wastes and the Elder's Recess. And so Tigrex just makes a lot of sense considering what we have in World already. The other reason why he beats out Barryoz is, simply put, he is more popular. Barryoz is a popular monster, don't get me wrong, but Tigrex would have been high up on this list even if it was my personal list, because monsters like Tigrex, Zanna Ogre, Barryoz, these monsters are, generally speaking, on a lot of people's top 5. And considering that popularity, and considering that Tigrex is pretty much a staple, he just had to beat out Barryoz when the points that they have going for them is pretty much the same. It's just that Tigrex had a little bit more stronger candidacies in both his popularity and the environments he could live in. You know, so that's the reason why Tigrex took the #1 slot. So there you guys have it. My list on what monsters are most likely to return in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Just remember, this is just one man's opinion. I have tried to rationalize things as best as possible, but Capcom could always see things differently than me. Like, they could throw Barryoz in just because, even if it doesn't thematically make sense. Like I said, I had a conversation with Nestrior, and he isn't a personal subscriber to the island, the Iceborne Island being Zora Magdaros. Like, he doesn't believe it to be possible, just like me. But he said that if they did add the Zora Island into Iceborne, that would open up a volcanic zone, which could open up Barryoz. And so since there's still a chance we get Zora Magdaros' island in Iceborne, although as slim as it may be, they could put Barryoz into the game, and it would fit thematically, right? And so just because I had to eliminate Barryoz from my list because of the facts that we knew, 100% knew so far, I'm going to have to say that, you know, Barryoz is just not coming, and this is the reason why. Anyway, let's move on to our outro, shall we? Well, that was it. Thank you all for watching the video. If you liked it, leave a thumbs up down there, and if you disliked it, leave a thumbs down. If you want to talk about the topic we discussed in this video, leave it down in the comments down below. If you have any feedback you would like to leave, you can do that as well. And as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and yeah, let the Saphire Star light your way. Later, hunters.